The rise of the Ottoman Empire in the late 13th and early 14th centuries was not the result of sudden conquest, but rather the product of relentless ambition, strategic diplomacy, and adaptive military campaigns. The Byzantine Empire, once dominant in the region, was now a shell of its former self, struggling with internal decay and external threats. This created a golden opportunity for the Ottomans to intervene, often presenting themselves as stabilizers rather than invaders. Major battles, including the Battle of Maritsa and the Battle of Kosovo, became defining moments in Ottoman Balkan history. Although rival Turkish beyliks controlled parts of central and eastern Anatolia, Bayezid launched campaigns to subdue these beyliks and bring them under Ottoman control. His efforts, however, were interrupted by the sudden appearance of Timur from Central Asia. Rather than relying solely on brute force, they used diplomacy, tolerance policies, and religious structures to stabilize newly conquered regions. Major rivers like the Danube became frontiers between the Ottomans and their European rivals. And refined strategies, especially into Eastern Europe, where the fractured political landscape of the region allowed the Ottomans to advance with minimal unified resistance. Under the leadership of Sultan Mehmed II, who came to power in 1451, the empire's expansion took on a more structured and long-term imperial vision. Mehmed, already known for his conquest of Constantinople in 1453, quickly turned his attention to the Balkans and beyond, determined to not only hold previous gains but push further into European territories that had resisted Ottoman control for decades. His campaigns into Serbia, Bosnia, Albania, and Wallachia were marked of diplomacy, siege warfare, and overwhelming firepower, especially as the Ottomans continued to innovate with advanced artillery and organizational military structures. The fall of key cities such as Sarajevo, the capital of Serbia, signified the collapse of local Christian resistance and the integration of these regions into the Ottoman administrative framework. One of the most persistent opponents of Ottoman expansion during this time was the Albanian leader Skanderbeg, who led a decades-long resistance campaign through guerrilla warfare, mountainous retreats, and alliances with various European powers. Despite his legendary status and tactical brilliance, the Ottomans gradually outlasted his resistance due to superior numbers, centralized authority, and relentless campaigning that eventually wore down local populations. Similarly, in Wallachia, Ottoman forces clashed with the infamous Vlad III, known as Vlad the Impaler, whose resistance was fierce but ultimately unsustainable. These conflicts demonstrated the complexities of Ottoman expansion. Not every campaign ended in swift victory, but over time, through persistence, diplomacy, and military superiority, the empire was able to extend its influence deeper into Europe. At the heart of this expansion was the Ottomans' ability to incorporate newly conquered territories into their vast administrative and legal system. The Ottomans did not simply conquer, they governed, and their system was structured in a way that allowed them to extract resources while maintaining relative stability. Newly annexed regions were often divided into provinces called sanjaks, each headed by a governor known as a bey or sanjakbi, who was responsible for tax collection, local law enforcement, and military recruitment. The Ottoman timur system, where land revenues were granted to soldiers and officials in exchange for military service, allowed the empire to control vast territories without relying on a large standing army in every region. This decentralized yet highly effective governance model ensured that the empire could expand without collapsing under the weight of its own administration. In religious and cultural terms, the Ottomans adopted a policy of tolerance that enabled them to rule over diverse populations without constant rebellion. Christian, Jewish, and other non-Muslim communities were allowed to practice their faith under the millet system, which granted them religious autonomy in exchange for loyalty and taxes. This policy reduced resistance and allowed for the peaceful integration of various ethnic and religious groups into the empire. It also enabled the Ottomans to leverage the economic and cultural strengths of their new subjects, transforming previously hostile regions into productive parts of the imperial economy. The empire's expansion was also supported by a vast network of infrastructure. Roads were repaired and extended to facilitate the movement of troops and goods, while bridges, markets, caravanserais, and fortresses were constructed throughout the Balkans and Eastern Europe. These developments not only enabled military mobility but also encouraged trade and communication across vast distances, further linking the empire's territories. Ottoman diplomacy also played a crucial role in managing expansion. While the Ottomans were formidable in battle, they often preferred to achieve political goals through treaties, vassalage, and alliances. Many local rulers in Eastern Europe chose to become Ottoman vassals rather than face total conquest. These agreements allowed them to retain their titles and some degree of autonomy in exchange for tribute, military support, and loyalty to the Sultan. Over time, many of these vassal states were gradually absorbed into the empire, but the initial diplomatic relationships allowed the Ottomans to expand with minimal bloodshed in several cases. By the end of the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire had not only solidified its hold over Anatolia and the Balkans, but had also become a dominant power in southeastern and parts of Eastern Europe. Cities such as Belgrade, Skopje, Sarajevo, and Sofia were now under Ottoman control, and their transformation into Islamic urban centers was marked by the construction of mosques, madrasas, public baths, and marketplaces. The empire's administrative, religious, and cultural institutions were deeply rooted in these regions, ensuring that Ottoman rule was not seen as temporary occupation, but as a new political and cultural order. At the same time, the Ottomans maintained continuous conflict with major European powers such as Hungary, Venice, and later the Habsburgs. These confrontations defined the geopolitical boundaries of the region for centuries and established the Ottoman Empire as a permanent player in European affairs. The Danube River, once a fluid frontier, became a fortified border between Christian Europe and the Islamic Ottoman world. Yet, despite the many battles and shifting alliances, the Ottoman model of expansion proved remarkably effective. Through a blend of military prowess, pragmatic governance, religious tolerance, and economic integration, the empire expanded its reach across some of the most contested lands in medieval and early modern history. The impact of this expansion was profound. It altered the balance of power in Europe, brought new cultural and religious interactions, and established a legacy that continues to shape the political and cultural landscape of the Balkans and Eastern Europe to this day. From a small Anatolian emirate to a transcontinental empire, the Ottomans achieved territorial expansion not through sheer conquest alone, but through a carefully balanced combination of force, structure, and vision. Skirmishes with Hungary, Venice, and Wallachia became regular. But the Ottomans were no longer mere invaders, they were now an established power, defending imperial borders and planning for even greater conquests. As the 15th century approached its climax, the world began to realize that the Ottoman Empire was not just a regional power. It was a rising superpower with a vision that extended far beyond its original tribal beginnings. They allowed local leaders to maintain some authority in exchange for loyalty and taxes. They established judicial and administrative systems that ensured order. And they encouraged trade, agriculture, and religious institutions to function with Ottoman support rather than destruction. This pragmatic approach helped integrate diverse populations and allowed the empire to grow sustainably rather than collapse under its own weight. In 1402, Bayezid was defeated and captured at the Battle of Ankara, causing a temporary halt in Ottoman expansion and a civil war known as the Ottoman Interregnum. For nearly a decade, the empire fractured as Bayezid's sons fought for control. These battles showcased the tactical superiority of the Ottomans and their ability to fight larger disorganized coalitions. The death of Sultan Murad I during the Battle of Kosovo only strengthened the resolve of the empire, as his son Bayezid I took command and pushed the empire further into European territories. Bayezid, known as the Thunderbolt, was particularly aggressive in his campaigns, expanding Ottoman control over large parts of Bulgaria, Macedonia, and northern Greece. Using a combination of military campaigns and diplomatic marriages, the Ottomans gained footholds in Thrace and eventually established Edirne as their new European capital in the 1360s. Edirne's capture was not just a symbolic act. It gave the Ottomans strategic control over the Maritsa River and direct access into southeastern Europe. His successor, Murad II, stabilized the empire further and renewed expansionist efforts, particularly in the Balkans. Murad faced fierce resistance from a new Christian alliance led by Hungary and supported by the papacy, but he remained undeterred. In 1444, the Ottomans achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of Varna, crushing the Crusader army and solidifying Ottoman power in southeastern Europe. Starting as a small principality in the northwestern corner of Anatolia, the Ottomans expanded their territory through a unique blend of warfare, religious influence, and calculated alliances. The Ottoman army was not a rigid force. It evolved with every campaign. The core of the military was the Ghazi warriors, frontier fighters inspired by religious zeal and promises of land and glory. But over time, the Ottomans added professional standing forces such as the Janissaries, elite soldiers recruited through the Devshirme system, Christian boys taken from conquered lands and trained to serve the state with fierce loyalty. These soldiers were not only well-trained but also deeply loyal to the Sultan himself. This gave the Ottomans a disciplined military machine capable of swift, organized action, particularly in foreign territories. At the heart of this expansion was a desire not merely to gain land, but to build a lasting empire, one that could rival and eventually surpass both the Byzantines and the fractured Seljuk domains. By the time of Sultan Orhan's reign, the Ottomans had already started extending their reach beyond their original stronghold. One of the earliest and most decisive moves was the capture of Bursa in 1326, which marked the beginning of the Ottomans' transformation from a frontier state into an organized and ambitious power. Bursa became the first official capital of the empire, providing a base for further expansion into Anatolia. From Anatolia, the Ottomans looked westward toward the Balkans, a region fragmented by internal conflict, local rivalries, and weakened Christian states. Key to their success in the Balkans was the use of a flexible military strategy. Throughout the 14th and 15th centuries, the Ottoman Empire continued its steady expansion in the Balkans, confronting powerful local rulers like the Serbs, Bulgarians, and Albanians. Meanwhile, in Anatolia, the Ottomans continued their consolidation. Despite this setback, the Ottomans quickly recovered under Mehmed I, who reunified the empire and reasserted control over key Anatolian and Balkan territories. By this point, the Ottoman strategy had become increasingly clear. The careful blend of military strength, political intelligence, and cultural adaptability allowed the Ottomans to solidify their presence not just in Anatolia and the Balkans, but now at the edge of Eastern Europe. As the 15th century progressed, the Ottoman Empire continued its territorial expansion with renewed force.